and then I had a cherry burl. That was run and turned into a couple bowls, comparing Osmo top oil to Waterlox original. I'm a fan of both. Osmo has taken over as my new favorite, but I have a very difficult time, as I mentioned prior, comparing the two. Oh, one looks great, one doesn't look great, whatever the case may be. So my best source of info is to run around and cut them in half, make a bowl, and compare the two with two different finishes. It may take more time, but it allows me to see what I'm working with. They're very, very similar. And I think the other one I did was actually with, what did I do the other one with? Birch? I think I did the other one with the birch. And that was a similar comparison. And in birch, in that scenario, I prefer the top oil. In cherry, I can go both ways. I literally can go both ways. And depending on how the surface is, whether there's surface checks or cracks or whatever the case may be, or features that are in you're just not going to cut away. I'm still leaning towards the Osmo. There's nothing wrong with the Waterlox, but I'm still leaning towards the Osmo.
Now, do you buff these after how many coats you putting on? What's your finishing routine? Do you buff them? Give us the whole scoop.
So the Waterlox, as a general rule, is 3 coats, then it's buffed with the Beal system, and then final with a Canuba. Right, the final wax is a Canuba wax. That takes time. And then the Osmo is 3 coats of Osmo, and then a final buff by hand with the towel, and that's good to go out the door. I'm good.
You don't use the BL system?
Both of these rounds were taken from the same tree, same half ring, whatever you want to call it. So
you don't use the BL system on the Osmo?
I don't. I haven't tried it on the Osmo because of the wax component in there, and the hand buffing and just rubbing with the microfiber towel seems to put on a shine that's maybe not as honey or shiny, but you're comparing one Waterlox varnish gloss versus, well, is that right? No, it's a poly gloss versus a wax varnish.
Well,
matte, I would call the Osmo a matte. So it's supposed to be different visuals, but comparing it in the same wood is the way that I need to see both in the same wood.
So when you say you put on 3 coats of Osmo, are those wiped on off the lathe, or are they buffed on the lathe, burnished on, or exactly how are you doing it?
Right, so it's off the lathe. All of the coats are off the lathe. I want access to the lathe. The lathe needs to keep spinning. And there's literally a station set up, a finishing station. You'll see here in a minute, I have another video for you.
So you wipe the finish on and then wipe it dry, right? So there's no puddles or anything. You do the same with the Waterlox?
I do the same with the Waterlox. So wipe on, the instructions talk about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Wipe on what you're finishing and then immediately transition into wipe off. Because the longer you wait, the harder you're rubbing and following up with that. And it's not that I'm not strong and that I can't do it, or anyone can't do it, but just get right to it, cut to the chase.
That's what I do too. I wipe it on and I wipe it right off, and so it's got a uniform coat in the wood somewhere, but there's no puddle on the surface, and I'm not rubbing hard on sticky, partly settled stuff. I'm just wipe on, wipe off.
Right, and the other one liner, and it happens more with the Waterlox. By the time I'm done finishing what I need to finish, the wood is absorbed in what it needs to absorb. Wipe off the residual, move on.
Yeah.
And wait another 10 minutes, you'll gain more. No, you're not going to gain that much more, and it's going to be hard work. Just wipe it off. You'll be fine.
Why 3 coats versus 4 coats? Have you fooled around with that?
I have. The 4 coats just seems to be dulling the edge with the Osmo. 3 coats gives me the matte surface that is blemish-free. The feel is right. The challenge with the Waterlox, I find 4 coats with the Waterlox gets it to the level where it's consistent. It's not that 1 or 2 doesn't work, but depending on the surface conditions of the wood, whatever the species is, 3 to 4 coats with the Waterlox seems to equalize everything, and it flattens everything. That gets me to an equal medium where it's all good. It's all absorbed in.
That's a terrific experiment in comparison to run. I've been wanting to do that myself. Now I don't have to because you're using the same finishes I've been working with for years, and I like them both for different. And I'm liking Osmo better these days because it's easier on my hands. It's just I don't know. It just feels good.
And I want to be clear. I'm not being negative against Waterlox. I still use Waterlox, and I don't want to create the impression that I'm trying to sell you folks on Osmo. There's a comparison for me to view where things are at. That's literally it. Apologize for the yellow bloody pictures, but it is what it is. It's what I had pictures of, and here we are. So
you got a video?
I have a brief video. I have had a very, can you folks see that? Is that spinning?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
It's not long. It's literally 30, 40 seconds. I had a large piece of maple that was put in the shed, I don't know how many years ago. I finally got it to turn, outboard turning, spalted maple, came out great. My reason for putting this up is a question for maybe Toby or somebody that works with the dyes and the colorations. This was a great opportunity to work with something other than Osmo. This was finished in an Osmo. It came out great. I'm not in love with the form, but what would have taken it over the edge, or what you'll see glowing here, are the chatoyance is coming out. You're seeing some rippling underneath. But I think that this would have gone great if I had used some color or worked at the color. And the grain you see, some people say, well, you shouldn't have the gray. That wood's not right, Wilson. You should have used something else. I think it works for this piece. So that's just my opinion. But I wanted to share it with you folks. That's it.
The thing that I would do
Is there a particular applicator that you're using, Jonathan?
So the consistent applicator is a really highly technical blue shop towel. So blue shop towel.
Paper or cloth?
It's a paper. The buffing takes over with the leftover dyed out, microfiber cloths. The buffing takes place with that.
I always put the first coat of Osmo on the lathe. I don't do that with Waterlox, but with Osmo, while I have the piece, before I take the piece off the lathe, I'll buff on that first coat and then wipe on the second and third.
Yeah, my process is once it's off the lathe, there's nothing more to be done on the lathe. Move right to finish. It goes to the finish station. There's the process. That's just the way that I've associated it with. The other challenge was applying wet finish way back when, and it wasn't, I say way back when, utilizing the Watco what is it?
Antique oil.
Antique oil, or the version they're in. I used to apply that wet, and you'd get the slurry, and that would buff and oil in, right? Not only would it make an unholy mess, there's nothing wrong with that, but you needed to clean up after. It just was easier. Get off the lathe, get rid of the dust, get out of that environment, push it over to the cellar, and you're seeing the cellar here.
Yeah.
And just that's the process. So.
Well, the other thing, if you were putting it on in the lathe, you have to develop the reflex of not standing where it's going to spray on you when you turn the lathe on, because it's going to cover your glasses with whatever that finish is.
Right, and I think we all have the wet turning lines on the floor, or the the kiln, or the refrigerator, or whatever is standing around, right, the lathe. What's that line from? Never mind, move along. So you try not to explain that to people.
Very good stuff. Any more questions for Jonathan or comments on these finishes? I'm delighted.
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Ron Sheehan. I guess I've been turning for 20-some years, and probably 2 or 3 years into it, when I started, I got on the Waterlox. I've been using Waterlox ever since on everything. You didn't say anything about a sealer. What I do is I take that Zinsser's seal coat shellac, and I thin that a little bit with alcohol, and I'll put a coat of that on first. Then light sanding, it'll raise the grain a little bit, and light sanding on that. And I find if I don't seal it, I'm gonna need 3 or maybe 4 coats of Waterlox. If I seal it, I can probably get away with 2 coats of Waterlox, but I nearly always do 3 coats. I've used Waterlox on furniture. tables and such as that, I'll put 5 coats on the top of the table, 3 coats on everything else. But I just wipe the Waterlox on with a small piece of cloth, or even use paper towel on occasion. But usually I'll use a cloth. I'll wipe it on and leave it overnight and put a second coat on and a third coat another day.
That's a good routine.
And then I'll buff it out with the Beal system, carnauba wax on top.
I've tried using that sealer stuff as a first coat, and I don't like it. It doesn't work for me.
You raise a great point, and when using the Beal system, what I've come to learn, or maybe it's not that I've learned, maybe it's a cheat or a hack, but you get a raised surface near, you're seeing an example of it here, cracking and splitting, checking, whatever the correct terminology is in this cherry burl. You'll gain a raised point where, and this is probably the wrong one to do it with, but you'll gain a raised surface where you're gaining excess on a crack or an issue. And with the Beal system, the Triple E is absolutely paramount to get that off, or to get that raised residual Waterlox off of that section. If you're not doing that, then what it transitions into is, or what I have done as a solution, between coats, you're steel wooling with the 4/0 steel wool to get rid of the raised bits, wherever the case may be. And the goal was, it's not that I'm against that, but let's minimize the work and try and streamline it as much as possible. So the Osmo, it's not an issue. And I don't want to be negative against Waterlox, but what you've provided is another solution, a great solution. So.
Well, I don't know anything about the Osmo. I've never used it, but I can tell you, Waterlox is repairable. I had a piece of furniture that I delivered up to Connecticut to my daughter, and it got a mark rubbed into it from riding in a car, and a blanket came off of it. And it was on a sideboard that I had made. Put that in the dining room, and there's this rub mark. And I anticipated that, so I took all my finishing, sanding, everything along with me. And I rubbed that out a little bit with fine sandpaper, put a couple coats of Waterlox on it, and the next day, looking at that finish, I could not find that mark.
Yeah.
It completely covered, it got refinished just like the original finish.
I've had the same experience with Osmo, Ron. It's also extremely repairable. That I like both finishes. Personally, I like the feel under the hand of the Osmo. It just feels nice on the finished piece. But that's not to take anything away from Waterlox, which is, as everybody knows, a great finish.
Yeah. Now, I don't know much about it. Bob Gockenauer is using a finish that he's buying, and I don't know what it's very similar to a Waterlox, but I don't think it's the Osmo. I forget the name of it anymore. I've seen it, but it's looks very similar to a Waterlox when he puts it on, but he's getting a nice result with that.
Yeah,
I'll have to look at that up and see what that is.
That'd be good to find out.
I've got a quick question. Between coats, do you use steel wool on both finishes or on none of them? How does that work?
I've gotten away from steel wool. It's just so much trouble getting the little bits of wool out a lot of times, especially if you have a
I'd use Scotch-Brite if I needed to do anything. I'd use Scotch-Brite exactly for Ron's reason. I don't like the little bits of steel.
Yeah, I use Scotch-Brite some, but I generally use a 600 sandpaper and just wipe it down very lightly with the sandpaper.
You let it set overnight though before that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, one of the reasons I transitioned over to the Osmo is that I don't steel wool between the Osmo coats, and that takes one component out of the process.
Yep.
It speeds it up.
You don't have to with Osmo.
You know, I don't feel the need, or I don't see the value, and I've done both. I've done it, but there's little, if any. I find little. In my limited experience, I find a little limited value in it. So
I go in with a shop towel and just scrub it with a shop towel, just as before this, between coats, just in case there's any
It's
loose
rare that I
crap
need
there.
to do anything between the coats.
Yeah.
So my question is, somebody that has experience with the coloration, this large piece came out great and looks nice, but with the coloration, it's the wood density that absorbs at different rates, the ebb and flow of the grain direction. Does the gray absorb differently than what I mean, that's a more aged, it's transitioned over to farther in the decay of spalting. With the coloration, would using color or the dyes absorb at a different rate? Those with experience, could somebody share with me that? I don't want to take up time, I'm over 11 here, but literally, does anybody have a 1 minute answer? The answer is probably yes, but
Yeah, the answer is yes. The spalting, depending on the degree of the spalt and the breakdown of the wood, it really increases or basically increases the absorption of the dye. So you end up with a different shade of color in that particular area, which enhances the whole piece because it makes different areas of contrast.
right.
Well, a thing I've been experimenting with, not successfully yet, is putting the dye in the Osmo. A little Osmo in a little cup, put a couple drops of dye in it, and apply that, and see how that goes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's but I have not got a good result yet. I'm not doing it. Beginning experiments.
All right, I'm going to try that on something small. I'm not doing that on a 22 incher. That's just I'm experimental, but I'm going to be chicken on that one.
Yeah.
That's alcohol and oil. Do you want to do alcohol and oil?
Well, there's the one-liner, right?
Seems to mix. Give it a try.
Yeah.
And let's report back next week. We'll see you all again.
Jonathan, the other thing is to spray water on that. You'll get a good impression of what's going to soak in and what's not going to. That'll give you a look before you put your dye on.
That's fair. That's a great idea.
That's a
Yes,
great point.
Wood shop.